welcome to the Ramblings of a 42-Year-Old Man. Chris here with you today as always, and we're going to have a special episode today centered around Final Fantasy XVI. Yes, finally recording the Final Fantasy XVI one. I played this game I beat it after 2 weeks, and then I played it again for an additional week to get the Platinum trophies. So about 3 week period I played this game. I sunk 97 hours into it over those 3 weeks. And spoiler, loved it. So definitely a game that I enjoyed quite a bit. We'll talk about some of the reasons why. We'll do some development talk. We'll talk about the setting and gameplay, the characters. Very brief plot. This game is pretty new. I will not go into plot by step-by-step details of the plot like I have with other Final Fantasy games. This will definitely be a little bit about the beginning and then just kind of a broad overview of the theme. And then we'll talk about kind of finishing thoughts on Legacy, which I mean it's been out for about a month now, so I don't know how much Legacy there is yet, but we'll talk a little bit about that. So we'll have a little bit of time here with Final Fantasy XVI. Again, just reiterate, loved it quite a bit. Final Fantasy XVI was released this year, 2023, obviously this year. June 22nd, 2023 was the official release date. It's a PS5 exclusive, so right now you can only play it if you have PlayStation 5. I do believe there will be a PC version eventually, and then I'm also sure eventually they will probably release it across systems once it's been out for a little while, but it's definitely, for at least the time being, a PlayStation 5 exclusive game. So it is produced by Naoki Yoshida, better known as Yoshi P, who was famous for being the pretty much creative director, producer, cornerstone of the Final Fantasy XIV game, the massive multiplayer online version of Final Fantasy that is gigantic right now. I mean, it's still just had a news drop just last week that there's another edition coming out, and that's going to continue going. So I mean, that has been out for like 10 full years now, and it just continues to grow and continues to do very well. So he comes over to head Final Fantasy XVI, the newest mainline series game. I always talk about music on here, so music this time is by Masayoshi Soken, who also comes from Final Fantasy XIV, and he has done the music for all of 14, including a lot of all the additional content that's come out over the years. I mean, he's done tons and tons of music just for that one online game. So he comes over to this one, and I have to admit, this is the soundtrack to this game is absolutely amazing. Everybody knows how much I love Nobuo Uematsu and all of his original soundtracks, and I haven't really felt like any of the Final Fantasy since he's left has really met that. This does. This is a return to form for Final Fantasy music. Absolutely in love with this. So yeah, that's a little bit about the background of the game. We'll go ahead and get into some of the setting and gameplay mechanics next.
The blind march is on. These people live with a knife to their throat.
You have to believe us! We'd help you if we could!
But you're helping us already.
We never asked to be saved. Did you think we'd thank you? They'll never forgive us. We're all marked now.
Every time you show your faces, it is we who suffer.
Sword sharp. You'd better hope so.
Crystals take more than they give.
You mean to tell me that the mother crystals are the reason the world is dying?
To hell with talking. If they won't give us a say, we'll decide our fates another way. Are you with me?
So setting of Final Fantasy XVI, after kind of, Final Fantasy XV felt much more modern. I mean, we're driving around a car through the majority of that game. This is definitely taking a step back into a medieval style setting, magical world. A lot of people have compared this to a Game of Thrones type feel, which I would say the beginning of this game you do get that quite a bit, and then it really gets fantastical by about honestly about the third way point of the game. It gets really, really fantastical, and kind of Game of Thrones gets a little left behind at that point. But it definitely starts off very, very similar feeling to Game of Thrones. But so we're on the twin continents of this world of Valisthea, and it's currently divided between 6 nations, and they all hold power through these magical crystals, like these gigantic, like bigger than cities, or like mountain-sized crystals that each of these nations have, and that's kind of their magical power comes from these crystals. There are also humans that can use magic without the power of the crystals, and they are known as bears. And they, being different, this is very similar an X-Man philosophy. Being different, they are, prejudiced against. They're put into slavery and bondage. They are looked down on. They are thought of as just beneath humans. But people use them for those magical abilities, so they're used as slaves a lot of times. So a lot of this game is really focused on the plight of these bearers and the prejudices and slavery and just the hardship they have. And a lot of the game we're fighting against that. Now, a powerful force in Valisthea is icons, and that is kind of the Final Fantasy XVI version of the summons that we've had in a lot of other games. So these are giant magical creatures, incredibly powerful, and they are kind of united with a host person, a host magical human known as a dominant. And so these dominants kind of control these, they actually kind of turn into these giant kaiju-like summon creatures. So, and a lot of these are based off of summons from other Final Fantasies. So we've got Phoenix and Ifrit and Shiva and Bahamut and Titan and Odin. Different summons that we've seen throughout a lot of these Final Fantasy games are these icon giant magical creatures. And now Valisthea is suffering from a depletion of magic, and it's causing a blight where the world is just withering all life. There's these just black areas of the world where nothing grows and there's no magic, and pretty much the only people that can go into these areas without just succumbing pretty much are these dominants and the bearers that have their own magical abilities. And of course this is happening across all these nations, so of course there's conflict between each other because everybody wants smaller and smaller pieces of land from then they need to branch out into other areas, which causes conflict that you have throughout all these nations. And so that's kind of the setting that we're dropped into, and we'll talk about the characters that get dropped in this world and kind of their backgrounds and what they are, and then we'll get into gameplay mechanics and a little bit of plot of the game as well.
You will pay for what you've done!
Why aren't you dead? You are bottom-branded!
Tell me true. Do you believe what I'm about to do is wrong?
I was forced to kill. You do it by choice.
They don't believe in me. They believe in the power of the dominant.
You can't blame a man for wanting to bring an end to all this, can you?
Ever led astray by your blind resolve. And thus is the light of hope severed.
We don't need your salvation. We'll save ourselves, and we'll do it on our own terms. Come to me, Ifrit!
So we talked a little bit about the setting, the Valisthea, the area, and kind of the world that these characters are in. We'll talk a little bit about the characters next. So we are our main protagonist, our only real playable character of this game is Clive Rosfield. Now, Clive Rosfield is firstborn son of the Duke of Rosaria, but he's unable to join with the family's icon, which is the Phoenix. That empire, it's not really empire, but that country, their lineage pretty much passes down to be dominance of the Icon Phoenix. Clive was not able to do so, so his younger brother Joshua ends up being so. We'll talk about Joshua in a little bit. But as such, he's kind of almost a black sheep in his family. His father still loves him, but his mother is definitely is just horrible to him, just really, really nasty to him. Now again, we are with this guy throughout the entire game. We see him at different stages of his life. This game crosses a period of almost 20 years from true beginning to end. So we see him as a teenager. We see him as upper maybe 20s. We see him in his 30s. We get a lot of this guy's life as we go forward. He also has a wolf companion named Torgal that is with us throughout the game. So where I say that Clive is our one solely playable character, we do have a lot of characters that are with us in battle through a lot of the games. And Torgal is with us pretty much the entire game on the battle side. Now, the only control we really have of him is commands that Clive can give him to have him do things. So technically, he is kind of a controllable character. You just have to control him through Clive. But now Clive does end up, and quick spoiler warnings a little bit here, he does end up becoming a dominant of one of the icons at a certain point in the game. I don't want to give too much away of how that works, but and then if he also has this ability to kind of borrow the icon's power, even when he's in his human form, he can use these different magical abilities from all of the different icons, which is a lot of how the battle gameplay mechanic works. So we'll go ahead and continue on with our character studies. So the younger brother of Clive is Joshua Rossfield. Now again, he's the one that gets chosen to be the dominant of Phoenix. So his icon is Phoenix, and again, second son of Rosaria, this country that he's in, and I don't want to spoil too much because Joshua himself is a little bit of a spoiler because things happen for him throughout the game that we don't necessarily need to know right up front. But I'm not going to get into too much about Joshua, but that's kind of the younger brother character of Joshua Rossfield. Cid, the Cid of this game. I will say right now, the Cid of this game is one of the coolest characters of any Final Fantasy, and definitely my favorite now, Cid, of all the Final Fantasy games. Now, he is a leader of this rebellion group, pretty much rebelling against all these empire houses and noble houses that are prejudicing against I can't think of the word right now, but anyway, they're making life horrible for all these magic people, these bearers as they're called, and he's fighting back against the slavery and stuff that they do to these people, and so he's seeking to free all of them from enslavement and abuse, and he is the dominant of the icon Ramu, who is kind of your lightning based summon in other games. Now he's kind of this lightning based icon in this game. Again, very, very cool character. He spoiler warning a little bit, he's not sticking around throughout the entirety of the game. There's a point where we won't have him anymore, so you really got to enjoy him while you do, because he is an amazing, amazing character when we do have him. And so, yeah, he kind of is, for the first third to a half of the game, kind of the main secondary character for Clive, kind of to bounce back against. Then we have Jill Warwick. So Jill was a childhood friend of Clive and Joshua's when they were growing up in Rosaria. She's not Rosarian. She's actually kind of, and this is where some of the Game of Thrones themes come in. If anybody remembers the character of Theon Greyjoy, he was Ned Stark's ward. He had gone to battle with his other country, the Iron Islands, and when he won, he took one of their children to be his ward. He would raise him in his home, and of course he treats him great. He treats him like a son. Similar thing here. The Rosarian Empire had a fight with this other country and took Jill to be their ward, and they raise her as one of their own. They really do. They treat her well, and she's raised properly and well, and so grows up with Clive, who is really, really close with her. Torgal, the dog who pretty much is Clive's companion throughout the game, is actually really Jill's dog. It just seems that he's always following Clive everywhere. And she is the dominant of Shiva, and Shiva we've known throughout almost all Final Fantasy. Ever since summons were first shown in Final Fantasy, we've had Shiva, the Ice Queen. And so yeah, she's the dominant of that icon of Shiva. In the demo, which I will talk about when we get to game, the plot summary that we're going to go to, Shiva is one of the first of the icons that we see, and she's very, very cool looking. So when we get to the game, again, she starts off, she's growing up with Clive and Joshua, and we get into some of the plot, we'll see how she ends up being when she's grown up and stuff as well. And then we'll get into kind of some of her backstory a little bit as well. All right, another kind of secondary character of the story, but really has a huge impact, is Dion Lesage. I'm not quite sure exactly how you pronounce his last name, but he's Dion. He's the crown prince of the Empire of Sambrek, who is actually kind of a rival of the Empire of Rosaria, but kind of like, again, kind of you start off with these Game of Thrones comparisons. Just because you're on kind of what you might consider the evil side doesn't mean that you're an evil person. Think of Tyrion Lannister. You know, we hate the Lannisters, right? But Tyrion, kind of loved Tyrion. Dion is like that. His father is this emperor who's ambitious and brutal and kind of rough, but Dion is very regal and stoic, and it's a dragoon-like character. He's kind of he looks a lot like a paladin, even though he's supposed to be this dragoon-like character, but he's kind of the moral compass for a lot of the story. And he ends up joining Clive and Joshua throughout their story, throughout the game. Like I said, he has a really big impact on the game, which is very, very cool to see. He also is pretty much the first canon homosexual character in a Final Fantasy game, especially one that takes this center stage. We may have seen things in other games, especially the Final Fantasy VII remake had definitely some focus in some areas, but this is a what I would consider a big main secondary type character that has this, and we just haven't seen that too much. And you know, it is nice to see representation in these games. So very, very cool there. All right, and then finally, I'll just talk real quick. There's a number of antagonists that we'll find out throughout the game, but our main antagonist through a good chunk of the game, and where this is a little different than Final Fantasies, is we know this guy through probably about a third of the way through the game on. You know, a lot of times these big antagonist characters, we really get to, like, maybe they're hiding behind the scenes, and we really don't see them that much till the end. But I mean, we know that this guy is kind of the big bad pretty early on, and this is the character of Ultima. Now, he is like the avatar of the consciousness of these alien beings that came to this world centuries ago, and they kind of discarded their physical forms to be able to reach Valisthea from wherever it is that they came from. And their planet had succumbed to this magical blight that's kind of affecting Valisthea now. So, you know, it's possible that they brought this with them. But it was destroyed, and they left that world to come here and pretty much created life on this world, evidently. So humans were supposedly created by this race of beings. And Ultima is their kind of avatar. And again, he's pretty much who we were fighting against throughout pretty much the last half of the game is all about kind of railing against him as we finally realize, you know, what is happening in this world. That gets us through our character studies. We'll talk a little bit about gameplay mechanics before we get into a little bit of light plot summary, and then we'll finish up from there. So just stay tuned, and what are we doing next? We'll do the gameplay next. So I already mentioned that your sole playable character that you control throughout the entire game is Clive. And you take control of Clive and a rotating party of AI-controlled team members. So like Jill will join you, but you're not controlling Jill. She's doing her own thing. Joshua will doing his own thing. Sid's doing his own thing. You know, you'll have these characters kind of coming in and out of the story, but your main controllable guy, you have Clive from beginning to end. And the world is kind of split between different environments. You got kind of dungeon environments, town environments, wide open fields, but they're all pretty much seamlessly transitioned into. You have big like map chunks, but on this map chunk you'll have the open world. You'll walk into a town. It's very, think of Skyrim, but instead of where you might go into a gate in Skyrim and come into a new like load screen and you're in a castle area, you're not getting new load screens when you go into these villages and castles and stuff. They're all part of this one giant load area. Now all these big areas can be reached through like a fast travel kind of overworld map. So I've heard some criticisms that this is not an open world game. I mean, it honestly really is. You can go pretty much anywhere you want in these areas. I mean, your story is leading you to a place. You're not going to go off forever, but no Final Fantasy has ever been that way. There's always been a path to go. You aren't just going to go, you're not, if you need to get to Junon Harbor in Final Fantasy VII, yeah, you can go play around the Gold Sauce for a little bit, but then eventually you're going to get to Junon Harbor if you want to continue the game. So here, you can go play around and do some side quests or go fight a bunch of battles on the map screen if you want to, but eventually you're going to continue on your path. And so I consider this as close to open world Final Fantasy as you really get, because again, you're not going to have a Skyrim open world with Final Fantasy. It's just never going to be that way, but this is about as close as you get to that. So again, with the gameplay, you got that, and while in battle, there's no like battle screen. Like, we've seen a lot of these turn-based Final Fantasies. You'll be walking around, all of a sudden you'll get into a random battle, and it goes to a battle screen, completely different screen in the world map. Here, you're fighting on the world map, very similar to Final Fantasy XII's. It doesn't really stop you to start a fight. You just continue, and all of a sudden there's enemies, and you fight them. And the battle system is more action-oriented than we might be used to, although Final Fantasy 15 had a lot of this kind of action-oriented battle as well. But the battle system, for me, is a lot of fun because it's a lot of variety. I mentioned with Clive's character, you learn a lot of different magical skills based on these different icons, and you can only equip a certain amount of these skills at a time. So if you want to play around with different skills and different combinations of skills, there's a lot of variety there. So, yes, this is not turn-based, sitting back, waiting for your turn to do an attack or do a magic spell or whatever, but there's so many different varieties of things you can do. It makes it very, very interesting. I've heard this battle system compared to the Devil May Cry series, and I think the person who created the battle system for the game came from that series, so it makes sense. Now, I have not played that series, so I can't speak to that. For me, it felt an awful lot like the Witcher kind of battle series. You come up to an enemy and you start battling, and yeah, you can just mash the square button the whole time if you want to, but the more fun thing is to change through all these different icon abilities and do all these different icon abilities. Each of these abilities you can do, and then there's a certain amount of time you have to wait before it charges up to do again. So you kind of rotate through them all, and you can pretty much make it to where you almost always have something available to rotate through, and again, it's a lot of fun, a lot of variety, a lot of playing around with it you can do. By the time you finish the whole first playthrough of the game, you'll have all of them, and you earn them out, at stages throughout the game. By the first playthrough, you'll have them all, and when you start your second playthrough, like I did, it's fun. You have all these different things that you can play around with, see what you like, try out different things. There's some that are much more brutal and harder hitting. There's some that build the stagger gauge higher that these enemies have. There's some that are quicker. There's some that are slower. There's some that'll hit multiple enemies. So there's just a lot of variety when it comes to the battle system. And being an old school Final Fantasy person, I love my turn-based Final Fantasies. Final Fantasy X's battle system is probably my all-time favorite. Even with this, but this is really fun. This is a lot of fun, a lot of variety, and it keeps you definitely entertained while you're doing it. So I liked it quite a bit. And then that's kind of how it is with the gameplay and everything like that. We'll get into a little bit of plot. Like I said, I'm going to stay pretty light on the plot, but we'll get into a little bit of it before we finish up here.
I'd heard rumors that you'd survived.
Lord Rosfield, I've been looking for you for a very long time.
I'll tear you apart with my bare hands!
Try it.
Now die!
You're not the only one who's seen their world fall apart around them.
I thought I was ready for this.
I know, but we will face it together.
We were talking.
Let's shut him up.
I am a shield of Rosaria, and I will do my duty. Come on, Ifrit. Show us your true power.
So a few weeks before the release of the game in June, so probably maybe like the second week of June, they released a demo of the game. Now the demo was pretty much the first chapter of the game, and it was pretty cool. You could play through it, and then when you actually went to the main game when it came out, you could carry it over, so you wouldn't have to play it again when the main game came out. You pretty much you played through that first half, and then you could carry over from there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the stuff that was in that demo, because anybody could pick up that demo and play it if they want to. It's free to download. If you have a PlayStation 5, anybody can pick it up. So we'll talk a little bit about the plot as far as the demo, and then we'll kind of broad overview from there. So the opening of this game, the first chapter kind of takes place 13 years prior to our main chunk of the game going forward. And we see our character of Clive. He's younger. He's probably, maybe, I don't know, 16, 17 years old at this point. And his brother Joshua is much younger, probably like 10 or something. But, teenage Clive, he serves as his brother's bodyguard because Joshua is the dominant of Phoenix. He hasn't completely taken control of that magic yet. That's where we're playing. We're going to be going to a ceremony where that's going to take place. But they both live in the empire, or I don't think it's an empire. You don't consider it an empire. In the country of Rosaria, I think it's called a duchy. I think it's the Duchy of Rosaria. And they live with their parents. Jill is there as the ward of the parents, but again, she's treated like she's one of their own, almost like a sister figure to Joshua, and almost more like a romantic figure to Clive. But the brothers then they accompany their father to this ceremony where Joshua is going to kind of learn how to control his Phoenix powers. But while they're doing this, they are ambushed by a rival country. I don't even know if they really say at first where exactly this rival's from. I think it ends up being the Empire of Sandbreak, but we just know that we've been betrayed. We're getting attacked by this other country. All these knights are coming, and we find out that Clive and Joshua's mother, who we've seen has been really, really horrible to Clive already, has actually betrayed them. And joined with the Empire, and they're the reason why all this is kind of taking place. And the Duke, here, spoilers again, I'm going to cover this part of the demo that you can definitely see online or play for free if you got a PlayStation 5 at all, but we're just kind of go through it. So the Duke dies right in front of Joshua, and it kind of scars him, and all of a sudden he bursts into being Phoenix uncontrollably. He has no control over the magic at all, and just kind of going all over the place. And then out of nowhere, this other icon shows up, and there's only supposed to be one icon per element. So like Phoenix is the fire, Shiva's the ice, Ramu is the lightning, Odin is dark magic, Bahamut is light magic. They're all got their own places. All of a sudden, the second icon of fire shows up, this Ifrit icon, and no one knows where, no one knows who, no one knows why. And there's this giant fight between the Phoenix icon and the Ifrit icon. And it's kind of our introduction to these big icon battles that we will have throughout the game. Think of like giant Godzilla-like kaiju battles. Pretty cool. And so that's kind of the main focus of this demo, is being able to see this really cool icon battle. And that's kind of the outcome of that battle ends our demo. It ends the opening chapter, and that's kind of where we stop with that little part of the game. So again, at this point, I'm not going to get into huge spoilers other than just to say that we do pick up 13 years later. Clive is now grown up. He had been enslaved by the Empire when they came in and kind of ambushed his father and his brother. And he ends up deserting because he finds a grown-up Jill, who he has been actually, him and his I guess platoon, unit, whatever you would call them, have been sent to kill this icon, this dominant of Shiva. And he didn't know that this dominant of Shiva was Jill until he sees her. When he sees that it's Jill, he's like, obviously I'm not killing her. He takes out his own unit that he's been working with, and he deserts the Empire to save her. He runs into Sid, who helps kind of get them out and takes them to his hideaway, and he ends up joining Sid's resistance. And that's kind of where I'm going to leave us. At that point, that kind of starts the main thrust of the game. There's a lot of, Clive has his own little personal journey that he needs to take care of, but from his point on, it is this resisting against the oppression of all of these kings and these emperors, and this beating down on all of the magical users, and these crystals are kind of controlling everything. And from the rest of the game on, it is a tale of redemption, rejection of enslavement and prejudice. There's a series of huge, epic kaiju battles I talked about. We have these icon battles, and throughout the game, we'll find out a lot more about this mysterious Ifrit icon, and exactly how that ends up working. And of course, we'll find out about Ultima and what his plans are, and what we really truly are fighting up against. I will leave that here for plot. I don't want to go any further than that because everything else would be considered spoiler. But I will just say, for me, this is the most dense and pretty cool plot since maybe Final Fantasy X for me. Final Fantasy XII had a dense plot too, but half the time I had no freaking idea what was happening in that game. I like the gameplay mechanics of that game more than the story. This one, the story is very, very cool. The gameplay mechanics are very cool as well. So big ups for this game. right, so here's the section where I usually talk about legacy of the Final Fantasy games. This game has been out literally 6 weeks, so I can't really say a whole lot about legacy. But what I will say is that it's been released to largely favorable reviews. The battle system has been praised. I've just done my own version of praising it here on this video, but it has been praised for its variety and its uniqueness. Now, of course, there's detractors. You know, you got your Final Fantasy purists are like, oh, it's not an RPG anymore, it's an action game. It's like, well, yeah, the battle system is definitely more action oriented, but you know, it's fun, and the variety of being able to do different things makes it role playing, because you're taking this role. You can play it the way you want to. You know, you have all these different abilities to choose from. So I consider it a role playing game. Totally. And for me, I've been playing Final Fantasy since the beginning, since the very first one. And yes, there are times where like I didn't care for Final Fantasy 13 because it got away from the turn-based and it got away from what I liked about Final Fantasy. Doesn't mean it wasn't a Final Fantasy game. It was just not my kind that I liked. Didn't mean that it wasn't somebody else's. A lot of people love that game. Same with 15. 15 I felt was an action game. It was way too much action game. And it's funny because this one pretty much picks up the same kind of thing and takes it just a step further. And I love this one. So what is it about it? I don't know. But all of them are Final Fantasy. They are all Final Fantasy games. Nobody can point to anyone and say, oh, that's not Final Fantasy enough. No, they're all Final Fantasy games. Final Fantasy has always been about change and new things. And if you want turn-based battles, Octopath Traveler, wonderful game. I loved it. There's other games out there that are turn-based, Persona and Bravely Default. There's plenty of things out there if you really want to get back to turn-based games. I will just pick up Final Fantasy VI again. That's what I love to do. But you know, this new style, I really, really enjoyed. And I think for me, what made this one stronger for me than maybe 15 and 13 is it got back to that kind of medieval setting. I love Final Fantasy IV, one of the early ones. There's Final Fantasy II way back in the day. It's the very second Final Fantasy game I ever played. And it's that medieval world. I love that setting. And that's still one of my favorite Final Fantasy games, purely on setting. You know, the story is really strong as well, but, you know, gameplay-wise, there's nothing really big there. It's just the setting itself, that medieval setting really makes it stand out. You know, I love 6 and 7 and 8 and, you know, 10, but those aren't medieval settings anymore, but I still love those games. The medieval tone to it, the knights in armor, the dragoons, the magic, these giant icons, I mean, I just loved it. I absolutely loved it. So a lot of people did too. Like I said, largely favorable reviews with criticisms just around kind of how it's a different feel to Final Fantasy, which I think people honestly just need to kind of get over that a little bit. But there's also some criticism around some of the side questing. And I will say there are a lot of fetch quest side quests in here early on that I feel don't add too much. I think what they were doing, and I understand it, and so I can enjoy it personally, is you're getting to meet a lot of characters in some of these places that you would not otherwise meet if you were not doing these side quests. So it really is a lot of character work. But yeah, you're getting sent to pick up this and bring it back here, and pick up that and bring it back there. And a lot of people don't like fetch quests. But there are side quests in here that if you don't do, you are missing big chunks of character interaction in the game. You're missing awesome scenes with Joshua or Jill or Sid, or characters that I haven't even brought up yet, like Gav and the person who sells the weapons and stuff. You miss really great character moments if you don't do the side quests. And yes, there are some chintzy ones that are kind of like, okay, that's obviously filler, but then you'll find really great ones that if you just say, oh, I'm not going to do all the side quests, you're going to miss some really, really cool stuff. So again, could the side quests be pared down a little bit or fleshed out a little bit? Some of them, yes. Some of them are fleshed out amazing. And if you give up on the early side quests and don't do some of the later ones, you're going to miss some really cool stuff. Now, the music from this game is, I've already talked about, just amazing personally, but I'm not the only one that says so. Everybody out there is praising the music and Soken's work, and it's just highlight one like I said, a highlight of the series today is it is the best thing that hasn't been done by Nobuo Uematsu in Final Fantasy, for sure. It's possibly probably my second or third favorite behind Final Fantasy VI, and Final Fantasy X and this one are probably pretty close together. And I would say, you know, Final Fantasy X was only partly done by Uematsu, so maybe that's why, but for me, this one is right up there with some of the amazing work, and just absolutely love it. I'm hopeful that in this video I'll be able to put some of the sounds and stuff without getting any sort of copyright infringement. Well, we'll see. Hopefully, if you can hear some of the music in this video, maybe you'll agree or you'll disagree. Maybe you don't. Maybe you don't like a lot of the kind of orchestral choir and stuff that he does. But there's some really, really amazing stuff in this game. So again, with Legacy, you know, sales just the first week alone were over 3 million, which for a game that was exclusively on one system, and a one system, the PS5 has not been integrated into many people's homes. It is not all over the place. It was so hard to get for so long. It's just now starting to become easier to get. But the fact that 3 million people still managed to get a hold of this game and play it was pretty good. Square Enix has already said that they're very happy with the sales for this game, and I'm hopeful that I mean, not that I ever think Final Fantasy is going to stop. We've got Final Fantasy VII Rebirth coming out soon. We've got Final Fantasy VII Ever Crisis coming to mobile phones soon. I mean, we've got a lot planned coming up. Final Fantasy is not going anywhere, but the fact that this game is doing as well as it is just going to keep it flowing. So that's great. I love to see. So yeah, the legacy of this game I think is going really well. I think it's doing exactly what Square was hoping that it would do, and I really hope that we'll continue to see games go forward. I want Final Fantasy 17 and 18, and I want to see how the Final Fantasy 7 remake comes out. And if they ever announce a Final Fantasy 6 remake, I just might pass out. Who knows? But yeah. So yeah, that's Final Fantasy 16, and I absolutely love it. It is probably in my top 5 of Final Fantasy all time. It is definitely, I've got 6, 10, 7, and this one are probably getting pretty close, because 7, I know 7 is a lot of people's favorite Final Fantasy. It's also a lot of people's first Final Fantasy. I think that can sometimes do that. But I've replayed 7 quite a few times, and while it's fun, this game I think just, again, it could be recency bias, but it's right up there. So it is 3 or 4 for me. Absolutely loved it. If you have a PlayStation 5, I would pick this game up. I think you would love it. And it's not a short game. You're not going to pay $60, $70 for a game and be done in 10 hours. It's going to take you, my first playthrough was 60 plus hours. I played it again. It was 90 plus hours. I mean, it's a good, solid investment. $60 well spent in my opinion. So that's Final Fantasy 16. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you, like, subscribe to the show. Like I said, I do mostly weekly check-ins now, but I also have these special kind of one-off episodes on big things that I've done, and will continue to do so going forward. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you everybody for listening. And as always, we'll talk again soon. Bye now.